Well, Rezzers, here we are. After 4 years of waiting for a sequel to Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, we have finally got our new entry in the series, Resident Evil Village. We have left the Baker estate for the isolated snowy village, swapped the Molded for the Lycans, and evaded Jack Baker for the towering R.E.T.I.N.A Dimitrescu, all led by the mysterious Mother Miranda. Taking on the role of Ethan once again, along with the return of Mia, and now the addition of their baby, Rosemary. Chris Redfield has also returned to the mix as well, with his allegiance being ambiguous at best. After 40 plus hours of gameplay, I am now ready to give a spoiler-free review of the game. Before we continue, please do subscribe to the channel and ring the bell to stay notified of new Resident Evil content. Taking my first steps into Resident Evil Village, I was filled with the heightened excitement and anticipation, just like the first time I played Resident Evil 25 years ago. Going from the storybook opening and the safety of the Winters home, to the woods, village, castle, and other surrounding areas. That sense of security and warmth at the Winters home never returns. Sometimes the fear got so intense I really struggled to get through some areas. This to me has become the perfect balance of survival horror and action. The Lycans have been a great challenge, but after a while the fear they induce does wane. Some of the enemies specific to areas are quite fear-inducing, but like most Resident Evil games, once you have a decent arsenal of weaponry and a large amount of health, you lose a lot of that fear and helplessness and become more brazen as you go along. Village does find a way to make you more fearful, even in the latter stages of the game, but it was always going to be difficult to keep players scared for 7 to 10 hours on their first playthrough, but Village does this very well. Following on 3 years after the events of Resident Evil 7, we see that Ethan and Mia Winters have both attempted to move on after the events of the Baker incident, moving to somewhere in Eastern Europe and having a baby together, Rosemary Winters. Having moved due to the continued involvement of the mysterious connections and the threat they pose to the Winters family. It's only after the appearance of Chris Redfield that events take a turn for the worse, with Ethan's life being plunged into chaos, as Rose is taken from him, and he finds himself in the titular village in search of his daughter. Throughout the game, the plot goes to some very dark places, showing more emotion and character from Ethan since his first outing. Chris's involvement complicates matters further, and doesn't really come to a head until much later on, but it does freshen up the gameplay when Chris becomes more integral to the story. We get to see the introduction of the 4 family leaders and the mysterious Mother Miranda. Each one of the 5 antagonists brings something unique and entertaining to the game. Most villains we have had in this series have been fairly hit and miss, barring the Weskers, Ashfords and the Bakers. Many of them really haven't left a huge mark. Lady Dimitrescu alone has taken the fanbase by storm, and understandably so, even getting the attention of non-Resident Evil fans under her long shadow. But I have to be honest and say that the hype and focus on Lady D does oversell her importance a little bit. She's still an excellent villain with great character and some brilliant set-piece moments, but the hype surrounding her I felt harmed her depiction in the game a bit. If anything, we got shown too much of Lady D, and very little of the other 3 lords and Mother Miranda. On a positive note, the little we did know of Beneviento, Moreau and Heisenberg made them even more impactful and fun, with Beneviento's contribution standing out especially. Moving on to Mother Miranda herself, it's difficult to talk about her without giving away too much, but from what I can say, she does hold the key to some details that would change the way we look at Resident Evil as a whole. Her design of a corrupted seraphim angel, looking divine while also being cruel, is well suited to her character. Seeing such megalomania in a character on a scale we haven't really seen since Albert Wesker, but without the 10 years of build-up he had from his beginnings as STAR's Alpha Team leader to criminal mastermind bent on complete global saturation. She shares some parallels with Resident Evil 4 villain Osmond Sadler, but with less exposure than her Spanish cousin. The real difference being that Miranda is more integral to the Resident Evil lore than Sadler ever was. While Miranda has only been introduced in Village, it doesn't take away from her importance as lead antagonist. While not specifically stated in story clearly by herself or other characters, her life before the events of Village has more far-reaching consequences than we thought possible. Chris Redfield's involvement is another difficult topic to cover here, but from what I can say, he does have some great moments that help prevent the game from becoming boring in the latter stages, and his portrayal in Village is on top form. His interactions with Ethan especially helped show a real chemistry that we haven't seen Ethan develop properly with anyone besides Mia and Evelyn in Resident Evil 7. There are moments from the story where you're still questioning and second-guessing previous entries of the series and the story of Village itself. By the end of it, you're wondering what the repercussions are going to be from what went down in Village. While the game does answer a lot of questions from 7 and Village, it does leave a few unanswered or ambiguous at best, leaving it open for the inevitable Resident Evil 9 to give us answers. But overall the story holds up well and is one of the most rich and lore-saturated plots in the whole of Resident Evil. Looking at the gameplay, while 7 gave us more of a focus on the horror that had been lacking since Resident Evil 4, Village would begin to see more of the action elements make a return again, with clear references and influences from Resident Evils 4, 5 and 6, taking the crafting system and the healing items from 7 and expanding upon them further with the inclusion of extra materials needed to build items, and the cooking system with the Duke using local wildlife. The return of an in-game currency in the form of Romanian lei allows players to purchase weapons, ammo, carrying capacity, and upgrades from the enigmatic Duke. Getting currency through killing enemies, finding hidden treasures, or earning them from enemies or boss fights to sell onto the Duke as well. One of the complaints we had from Resident Evil 7 was the lack of regular enemy variety and their difficulty, but Village takes what 7 did and just blows it out of the water. The sheer scope and amount of enemies throughout the game is one of the largest in the series, even having a couple of unique boss and sub-boss fights to help prevent enemy encounters from becoming stale, with the Lycans taking the lead role and the heads of the 4 families having their own minions, each with unique designs and styles of attack. Some of the enemy designs can be fairly similar at times, and some are just so out there you wonder what kind of warped mind came up with them. Some of the more unique enemies across the game felt like they could have been used a little bit more, but considering what we got, I would be willing to ignore that particular criticism. Controlling Ethan feels a lot more fluid, and the guard has been improved with the new counter-attack move added to your repertoire. On lower difficulties you're rarely going to be using the guard function, but when I did, it was welcome to have a counter-attack of sorts to give you some breathing room. I did find that I would forget to use it on occasion, and it didn't really make that much of a difference at times. And it won't be as stylish as Jill's dodge roll and attack from Resident Evil 3 Remake. The item management system inherited from Resident Evil 4 has returned with a new, more slick and easy to use UI, has given us the wonderful and almost borderline OCD pastime of arranging items as we see fit. From the 10 plus hours of my first playthrough, I must have wasted at least 2 hours organising items in a way that I felt comfortable. While we do lose some of the stress of item management with a limited inventory and using item boxes, the new system is still welcome, forcing you to decide to part with upgraded items to move on to new weapons with more potential for Lycan destruction. You can still buy back the items later if you're feeling a little nostalgic for a certain weapon, but you'll have to pay the upgraded price instead, which was something that was lacking in Resident Evil 4, where you had to build up the item's upgrades again after selling it. Moving on to one of the biggest features of the game is the village itself. It's safe to say that Capcom have been more than ambitious with this entry, having the village act as a central hub for the 4 family locations of Dimitrescu, Beneviento, Moreau and Heisenberg, along with a few other spots as well. This is truly one of the most open-ended maps in the series so far. While not truly open world in the traditional sense like say Breath of the Wild, it still bucks the trend of linear progression with a lot of backtracking like previous Resident Evil titles, with the village itself having to be revisited multiple times for a single run. Even with the choice of optional areas to explore for bonus items to help you on your playthrough. The side tasks and areas to explore as you progress through the story make the village feel almost new every time you revisit it. Even gaining certain key items as the story goes on to unlock new parts of the village was a great feature to add. The scale of the map has to be seen to believed, and the beauty of it is that you're so engrossed and lost in this horrific world that you don't ask the question of where is the fast travel system. It just doesn't need it. While the map is large, it's drip-fed in such a way that you want to explore every possible location in the game, and without giving anything away, it is absolutely worth exploring every area possible. What's more impressive is the lack of loading screens between your locations. You're so lost in the game that you don't even notice most of the time. If there is a particular criticism I would have to throw at this map, is that you can't revisit certain locations after going through them. The potential for this new style of exploration could open up further experimentation of this concept in future installments. The only issue is that Capcom could potentially make a world map that's too vast to be believable within the context of the story. The village and its surrounding areas worked very well, but apply that same idea to, say, Resident Evil 2 or Resident Evil 5. It would fall apart since neither share a single focal point that you can return to, besides the RPD at a push. It does make you lament the lost opportunity of Resident Evil 3 Remake being potentially much bigger, using the subway station or another location as a central hub to reach other areas. Coming back to the Four Lords and Mother Miranda, you have the inevitable boss fights with each of them to look forward to. Each one brings their own unique challenge, whether it be accuracy, using the environment, speed, or reflexes. All of them are fun to fight, and in a couple of cases they can be so unnerving to look at. Making your way through them to Mother Miranda herself, who makes up for the last 3 final boss fights from Resident Evil 7, 2 Remake, and 3 Remake. Showing that Capcom have learned from their past mistakes with Evelyn, Birkin, and Nemesis, who all shared nearly the exact same style of final fight, but each had their reasons, both good and bad, to be done the way they were. When you do complete the game, the unlockable post-game content is made available to you. The range of content available is vast, and makes use of the game point system introduced in Resident Evil 3 Remake. Thankfully, on your first playthrough you should be able to purchase at least half the unlockables, from 3D models and concept art, to unique weapons and infinite ammo to be used on a new playthrough. Beating in-game challenges from completing the game in 4 different difficulties, and within what seems an impossible time limit, to give us the replayability that was sort of lacking in 7. While we had something similar in 2 and 3 remakes, the challenges did feel a bit too easy to complete, but Village is going to be pushing many like myself for months, keeping us entertained for a long time. The challenges to beat are broad and fun, for both the main campaign and the recently announced Mercenaries mode, which plays as you would expect, running around killing Lycans before the time runs out. I'm personally not a huge fan of Mercenaries mode, or any multiplayer in general, but this one I enjoyed. Not only does it play like the Mercenaries mode of Resident Evil 4, with you attempting to chain kills and gain playtime, it also allows you to pick up special abilities to use inside Mercenaries mode as you go along, some for increased damage and speed, or some to improve your guard and close combat attacks. I was a bit out of practice when I played this mode, so it didn't fare too well, but I still enjoyed it and intend to get the elusive S rankings or higher to finish my achievements. But I do think it was a bit cheeky to have Mercenaries mode need a set amount of points to unlock, rather than just beating the game once to unlock the mode like the original Resident Evil 3. Before we move on, the last thing I want to talk about is the photo mode feature. We were teased about it and we saw it in the showcases and the demos, so I was looking forward to experimenting with the many shots we would get from the game. It has a lot of options, from filters and camera settings and even hiding characters and monsters, along with other functions to make it able to capture very decent images from where you're standing. The important bit, from where you're standing. You can't move the camera in photo mode except rotating on the spot like a fixed tripod. Also, you end up with the Capcom copyright messaging on any image you capture in photo mode. Why the camera is not given more freedom, I'm not sure, but PC modders have already come up with another free cam mod like the Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes, which would allow us to capture footage as well as photos from unique angles. It's not the end of the world, but the photo mode does feel a little restrictive compared to games like Spider-Man, God of War, and Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. This has now been the 4th entry in the series to make use of the R.E.T.I.N.A engine, and now the devs have really grasped how to eke every tiny detail out of their characters and environments while retaining a high level of performance. While playing the demos on the PS4, the visuals were intricate, detailed, and memorable. Come the PC version, and the power of the real-time ray tracing only enhanced the visuals further, with little lag in performance. Characters like Mia, Baby Rose, the giant Lycan, and Lady Dimitrescu all stood out especially. There are other standout creatures and moments in the Beneviento house and Heisenberg's factory as well, but I won't give those away and ruin the spectacle. But one area we can look at in depth would be Castle Dimitrescu. Out of all the areas in the game, this is truly the most polished and unique of the lot. showing an opulence and refinement that would not look out of place if the Spencer Mansion was recreated with the same level of detail in the RE engine. While retaining its stunning architecture, it still has its areas that would instill fear and anxiety, even in the most hardened of players. The flips from using light and darkness gave me the vibes of Resident Evil 5, and their attempts to use environmental lighting to bring fear back into the action-focused title from their early trailers and gameplay, which was sadly dropped before release. In this case, Village has got it right. Second guessing as you go from a well-lit area to a dark area, unsure if the movement you saw was your own shadow, a piece of furniture, an item falling over, or some unspeakable monstrosity coming for your flesh. The attention to detail and scale of this game cannot be understated. From villagers and wildlife to monsters and environments, this entry has not cut corners with its design and visuals, making it one of the most beautiful looking titles of 2021 and the Resident Evil series as a whole. A lot of praise has to go to the designers who came up with the concepts for a lot of the environments and monsters. The variety and character behind each design was unique and memorable. If there was one thing I could nitpick, it would be that some of the villagers looked slightly off. Something about the eyes on a couple of the character models looked almost dead, but that could be put down to the stress and weariness of the character in the situation. I would like to go in more depth on the visuals and design of the Four Lords, but I can't really go into it properly without spoiling the story. All I will say is that the detail on Moreau especially is amazing, and I would recommend looking closely at his 3D model in the unlockables when you finish the game. With previous Resident Evil titles like Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 Remake, you may have noticed that a lot of models in the background have been reused, say the mannequins or the books. I did feel a bit disappointed I didn't find another copy of They Killed Him in Resident Evil Village, and I did genuinely try to look hard. But it was good to see less reused assets in this game as well, besides the obvious characters that were reused and maybe one or two items. While it is still early days for Village, the general consensus puts this game at near the top of the list for best Resident Evil game, currently standing at 4 million sales in less than 3 weeks. While there will be those critics that will denounce it as not being Resident Evil due to the first-person view or lack of classic characters like Resident Evil 7 did, it does a good job of bringing it back to the central story and the lore of the series, while also trying to start afresh without needing to know the full 25-year history of the survival horror saga. To me, while many would consider Resident Evil 4 the pinnacle of the series, I would argue that Village is going to be the catalyst that sparks a renaissance in the survival horror genre, showing that being more experimental and adventurous with gameplay features not normally associated with the survival horror genre can work. The depiction and depth of characters and story in Village only adds to an already amazing game. Resident Evil 7 got its range of decent DLC, but since then we only had a couple of bits for Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 remakes. I would like to see Village get some post-story DLC similar to Not a Hero and End of Zoe, or maybe go a step further and do prequel DLC detailing the events leading up to Village, surrounding the 4 families, or the village inhabitants and their daily lives before all the death and chaos happened. While playing Village, with my partner watching, she asked me the most difficult question I could get at that point, which was where do I rank Resident Evil Village in the overall series? I can't give a definitive answer since I haven't 100% completed the game yet, but based on the campaign runs and my exposure in the demos, I would have to put this in my top 3 at least out of the whole series. One day I could look at ranking the entire series based on my own experiences and opinions, but I could argue that Village may just deserve the top spot, but play for yourself and make your own mind up. Thank you for watching this spoiler-free review of Resident Evil Village. Please don't forget to like and share, and please subscribe to the channel and ring the bell to stay notified of new Resident Evil content. And why not leave your thoughts in the comments section below on your experiences of Resident Evil Village. Thank you, Rezzers, and I'll see you all later.